and welcome to my channel. My name is Victoria Bedford. I'm a spiritual holistic therapist. So today I'm going to be speaking about how do we abuse ourselves. And there is a reason why I speak about the things that I speak about on this channel. Let me get comfortable. I originally started as a medium and a tarot reader, and have evolved into a spiritual teacher due to healing my own things from my own childhood, my own traumas, my own pain, my own abuse. And the things that I bring to this channel are, in fact, ways that I have learned to heal myself. And the reason why I had to learn to heal myself is because after the things that I went through, I was extremely depressed, anxious, suicidal person with many mental health diagnoses, and I was trying to be a mother and a partner, and I felt like I was hugely failing at all of these, mainly the partnership thing. The motherhood I felt I was okay at, as I was trying to change some of the things that I'd been through, but there was so much that I wasn't realising that was affecting my children because of my own pain and traumas, and because I didn't see how I was reenacting some of the things that I went through into adult things that I was now putting my children through. So this channel, I speak heavily about ways of understanding how do we heal and grow. Now, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, I don't want to give too much information in this video because it's not what it's about, but when you've been through things in childhood or early adulthood or even late adulthood, when you go through abuse or when you go through hugely challenging times, you get to see parts of yourself in the way that you don't want to. You have to face depression and anxiety, and you can feel extremely low. But it's not just depression and anxiety, it's behaviours that you have that you didn't know were destructive. Behaviours such as being angry all of the time or not allowing anger in. Behaviours such as being a people pleaser. Behaviours such as, addictions or destructive behaviours. There's so many things that come under the bracket of healing, but when you've gone through stuff in your life or you haven't learned healthy coping mechanisms, you behave in ways that just end up becoming destructive without you even realising it. And we can also blame other people and say, well, it's their fault. But the truth of the story is, if we don't take accountability for our own life, then we're never going to have a life that's happy or a life that's beneficial. So what I bring to you is, how did I start healing? And there's other videos that you can have a look at that will talk a little bit about other parts of my story, and there will be future videos that come. But today's video is going to be about how do we abuse ourselves. So you don't have to label your childhood as abusive for it to have been abusive, because people normalise behaviours so much. We could have emotionally distant parents, emotionally unavailable parents, parents who shouted all the time. That is abuse. Whether we want to believe that or not, it abuses us because it doesn't meet our need in a really healthy way. Now, there's different levels of this. Some people are extreme in how they treat their children, and some people aren't. They just have unhealthy behaviours. I don't feel I've abused my children, but I do feel my abuse led me to not know how to healthily raise my children at times. But how do we re-abuse ourselves? So this potentially is for people who have been through stuff in their childhood. So if you have, or you've been through something in early adolescence where you've been through an abusive partner. But the likelihood of you picking abusive partners without suffering some form of abuse in childhood is extremely rare. Because the reason why we pick these people in our adulthood is because we're replicating what we've been through in our childhood. The partners that we pick in adulthood have characteristics of our parents because that's what we are used to. That's unconsciously what our energy is used to. And I want you to reflect on that for a moment. Until you start to heal and understand what partners you're picking, if you've grown up with a mother who's emotionally unavailable, who shouted all the time, or who was really anxious as a person or critical, or, you know, you're going to have some of these characteristics, but it's also the partner you pick. And how I know this is, I grew up with a father who was an alcoholic. He was extremely physically abusive. He was sexually abusive at times, but he was also highly critical. And what that meant is I kept meeting partners who either had alcohol problems, cocaine problems, who was emotionally unavailable, who was critical, who, you know, I was meeting replications, because our mother is the people we want to become, so, or the people we turn out to be, you know, they're the replications of who we're going to become, and our father are the people we're going to meet. So majority of the time, we end up meeting lots of people who are like our father, and sometimes people who are like our mum. And that is a form of re-abuse, because what we're doing is we're replicating abuse that we've been through in childhood into adulthood. And if we heal that with a partner, but we don't quite recognise that's what we're healing. So say we recognise, well, we want to be on our own, we don't want to be with a partner again because they're abusive. We could be friends like it, friends who replicate coldness, or friends who replicate, you know, critical behaviour. So until you recognise kind of what you experienced in childhood and how you potentially are picking that in friends and partners, you won't understand how you're re-abusing yourself by doing that, because you're putting yourself back in unhealthy, you know, situations. And we sometimes doubt ourselves and think, well, all people are like this, or, you know, but I love them, I want to help them. The truth is, we can never help anyone else get better. We can never help anyone else make better choices. You know, there are some people we can support, but they have to be showing actions themselves to be making changes. And if they don't want to take ownership for the fact that they're unhealthy in some ways, and you know, you keep wanting to talk with them and nurturing them, but you also have to understand, do you have these behaviours? Because this is the next part. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how do we abuse ourselves. We can abuse ourselves in a lot of different ways. When I was abusing myself, I was somebody who's spoken highly critically about myself, calling myself fat, ugly. Even when I was thin, I was disgusting, I was ugly, I never looked good. I would eat so much crap, or I would starve myself. I would drink alcohol in excessive amounts, or I didn't understand how to treat my body in a nice way. I would be in nasty friendships where we was always arguing or pulling away from each other, or, you know, having our say or getting angry with each other and not even telling each other. I was always potentially feeling that life was shit and I was the victim, and, you know, nothing's ever going to change. And what I was doing there is, and what we tend to do is we tend to disempower ourselves because we've never felt any power. So if we have been through abuse and we're re-abusing ourselves, we feel disempowered. We have never felt we've had power because growing up, we can't tell our dad to do one. You know, we can't tell an abusive person how we think, because we're going to get either hit, or we're going to get not spoken to, or there's going to be serious consequences. You know, an absent mother who can't emotionally connect, doesn't matter how much you tell them how you feel, they don't know how to connect. So you've learnt to shut down. You've learned unhealthy ways of dealing with things. And so when we re-abuse ourselves, when we abuse ourselves in adulthood, we just replicate that same behaviour. You know, and we don't have self-esteem enough to realise the potential of who we are. And how I started to realise I was abusing myself was, well, for one, I never felt good. I never felt happy. And when you are abusing yourself, you don't feel happy. You don't have love and compassion for yourself. I hated myself. I always thought, I'm never going to be able to change. Things are never going to be able to get better. It's either someone else's problem, you know, they're the problem, they're the problem, they're the problem, or I'm the problem, I don't know how to change. And when I started to realise that I was just replicating other forms of abuse on myself by my critical thinking, by my eating shit, by my alcohol abuse, and by doing the things that were so unhealthy, I had to realise that I had to start slowly building, there's a fly in this room, I had to slowly start building some self-esteem. Not having boundaries with other people, because I never had boundaries with my parents, because, well, if I tried to have a boundary, well, you can't have boundaries with unhealthy parents. There's lots of healthy parents out there, but unfortunately I wasn't a child of a healthy parent. And there's majority of people have unhealthy parents. But they're unwilling to acknowledge that, because nobody wants to, we believe that if we look at our parents as who they were, that means we don't love them. That means we have to hate them. That means we have to say they're bad people. Majority of people, our parents, had bad behaviours because they didn't know any different. Unhealthy behaviours because they didn't know any different. Some were just downright abusive because anger passed down their family line, or some were just unhealthy in ways because, again, they didn't know any different. And they would probably self-abuse. And self-abuse is not always drink and drugs. Self-abuse is not allowing yourself to have friends, not connecting to people, pushing people away. Self-abuse is not knowing how to be vulnerable. Self-abuse is not trusting yourself. This is abusing ourselves because we are disconnecting from every form that we are. And when I looked at my life and how it was, I realised how much I was self-abusing. And obviously we can't change this all in one understanding. This has to be done in levels. But when I looked at how I was impacted by my childhood and what had happened to me, I realised I was doing it all to myself. I was invalidated as a child. I invalidated myself. I was spoken to so poorly as a child. I spoke to myself so poorly. I was disconnected from my parents. I disconnected from people in the world. And we recognise that we're replicating our upbringing in some way. My mum was highly anxious and paranoid. I grew up highly anxious and paranoid, believing everybody was out to get me, believing everyone had it in for me, believing no one loved me. And in turn, believing, not loving myself, believing I was just a mental head case, believing that all my labels meant I was never going to be able to get better. And while diagnoses can help in some aspect, it has been proven that depression and anxiety, even though there is some genetic component, but about 30% of people potentially have this, it's not a gene that's passed down, but it's, a genetic opponent that can be found in people. 70% of people, it's from their environment. It doesn't have to be your parents, but it's from your environment. 70% of people who go through depression, it's environmental. There's environmental, as well as nature and nurture with your parent. And the majority of people of us don't heal because we take tablets that don't help us, because we've been told that it's a chemical imbalance, but it's not. It's actually been now proven there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. That actually depressed people show lower chemicals because they are depressed by their environment and by the things that they have been through, not because they were born with a chemical imbalance. Now, if somebody's born with a genetic disposition, if they have a good environment, they're not any more likely to get depression. But if someone's born with a genetic disposition and then they have a real hard environment, they're more prone to get depression. So that's how it's passed down. It's not passed down gene-wise or chemical imbalance-wise. And this is why I share this stuff, because empowering you all to know that you can heal. I promise you, I'm doing it. I am living proof from my environment and from my addictions, from my really abusive ways to people, as well as myself. I, definitely had borderline personality disorder. I was never fully diagnosed with that one, but I know hands down I had it. I was hugely toxic and I felt victimised, but I was also hugely vulnerable and open to lots of abuse from lots of people. And I was in this cycle of sensitive person who was vulnerable to this abusive person who was toxic, you know. And I, you know, being on tablets felt so unempowered. But when I started a journey of self-discovery and started to understand how my environment, how my childhood affected me, and I validated that, it still makes me a little sad now, not because I'm triggered, but because I know how many people have been through so many different things that we don't label abuse for whatever reason, and we don't have to label abuse, but we have to understand how our environment has affected us. Because you know, how we start to heal and stop abusing ourselves is we have to learn our worth. And you're worth so much more than what you are living right now, than what you give yourself credit for. When we have low self-esteem and low worth, we don't want to eat right because we can't be bothered. We don't want to drink what's healthy for us because, well, we're not in that routine. We don't put boundaries in because we don't know how to, and we don't want to face conflict. We feel shame when we do get angry and have conflict because we feel like we went too far, because we don't know how to manage our emotions. And then we're caught in cycles. Recognizing that right now you might be abusing yourself and not living in a healthy way may be able to empower you to recognize what needs to change. When I started to slowly change what I was eating, and still eating takeout and still eating caffeine and sugar and things like that, but very, very minimally, and actually choosing and being mindful about what I ate, but also being mindful about eating something healthy, I started to feel better and generate more energy. When I started to work on calming my nervous system down through mindfulness and through connection of the breath, I started to feel less stressed, and I started to able to face some of the things I needed to heal from. In my YouTube channel, there's videos on how do we emotionally regulate, how do we face our emotions, and these are all key points to how do we start healing. Researching boundaries, how do we start putting in boundaries? How do we start facing conflict? We need to start learning to face conflict. Learning to face conflict is so important, because otherwise you create inner conflict. If you don't face that conflict with another because you need to say something and you're scared, you will only keep it internally. Compassion. Learning to love who you are in all your forms, in all your mistakes. We are human. Doesn't matter what we know and how much we know it, we're still going to make mistakes. We're still going to have old habits. So learning to have compassion for why we're doing the things that we're doing, and connecting to them slowly, and start with each behaviour, learning to address it. Look at the biggest behaviours in your life that are affecting you the most. The biggest one that I had to face the most was my triggers. I was a very extremely emotionally unregulated person who had high triggers. So that was something I chose to first focus on. And I had to learn to start emotionally regulating myself and facing it and understanding what my triggers were. Then I had to go on to what is my boundaries. How do I want to put some boundaries in? What are flexible boundaries? What are strong boundaries? And I had to then go through what are requirements from friends or partners, not expectations, because with every expectation is a disappointment, but we are allowed requirements. You know, if somebody doesn't stay in contact with us regularly, but they want us to help them out with things, well, our requirement can be, well, I'm not here to just be picked up and put down whenever you feel like it. I understand you're busy, and I understand we all have a life, but in balance, if you're only taking from me and not giving me something back, a requirement for me is that actually this doesn't feel very balanced. So we're either going to communicate and work through that requirement and say how I feel, or I'm going to have to step back and just put a boundary in and say no more. Learning to break our life down. Are you somebody that's rushing around all of the time? You know, are you a perfectionist? working through some of these behaviours, and if you sit and reflect long enough, you'll be able to understand what some behaviours are affecting you. We have lots, I don't say we, but I had lots of behaviours that are affecting me, triggers, saying things I didn't mean. I had to slowly start working through each of them. But unless you're recognising that you're abusing yourself, because anything that doesn't leave you feeling good and you're regularly doing it is abuse. You know, the word abuse has been given such a dirty feel to it. We feel that when we say abuse, oh, it's got to be sexual, it's got to be real deep, nasty abuse. No. If somebody is saying nasty things to you all of the time and you tell them that hurts you and they don't stop or they don't look to understand why they're doing it, they are abusing you. So if you are saying nasty things to yourself all of the time and you're never questioning why you're talking to yourself like that, you're abusing yourself. You never question, actually, I don't want to talk to myself like that anymore. And this is when we come into rewiring. We come into, and I'll do another video on that later about how do we learn to rewire our mind when we're so used to having a critical mind and a mind that looks to be negative and talk about ourselves in a hard way. We have to start rewiring it, which is breaking the schnapps. It's called schnapps. These are wirings within your brain. At the moment, your brain is wired to instantly go to negativity, to instantly go to critical thinking. So to start breaking that wiring, which we can do, neuroscience is proven time and time again now that we're not stopping our neuro changes. As time goes on, our neuro changes can be changing like that. You just have to create action towards the neuro change you want. If you want to change your wiring, you have to change your actions. So if I want to feel calmer in my body, I have to slow down. I can't expect to feel calmer in my body if I'm running around all the time, because my neuroscience wiring is leading me to need the adrenaline to keep running around. Well, we all know adrenaline comes from stress. Too much adrenaline and cortisol creates the body under tension, creates anxiety. So I've had to break that down and go, well, I've got to realise that I can't be busy and calm. I can't be over busy and calm all of the time. So I've got to change my action with that. And I've got to learn to rewire myself. And what I had to do is I had to learn to sit down. And when I sat down, I felt lazy. And I had to feel the feeling, I'm not lazy, I'm relaxing. This is important. But you need to do this. No, I don't need to do that right now. I can do that tomorrow. And I had to feel the urges that I had to keep pushing myself through abusive behaviours. I would get up, I would be making lunch, making breakfast, taking kids to school, doing my work, doing the housework, taking kids to their clubs, coming home, doing the cleaning, doing what else. And then by 10 o'clock, I've been going all day, and I'll do that every day. Well, we don't challenge that notion that that's unhealthy because, well, we've been taught as a society. That's what we do. Productivity. We can do it all. But just because society deems that normal, please believe me, this is why depression and anxiety are on an increase. If you are connected to having to be busy all of the time, you're disconnected from life, from the world. Depression needs you to be connected to people. It needs you to be mindfully connected to slowing down on what you're doing. It needs you to start enjoying life. It needs you to have a purpose. Depression needs you to have those 4 things to not have depression. If you don't have those 4 things, you have depression. And there's more than 4 things. But society has created the norm. And we talk a lot about, negative thought patterns and things like that, but we talk about it, we don't change it. So many people talk about it, but we need to start changing it. And this is the part you have to be committed to. Your healing doesn't change without small commitment. Even getting up and doing a morning meditation for 10 minutes, for listening to quotes or listening to affirmations, well, you might think, what a load of fucking bollocks. Well, you can keep doing what you're doing, but you're not going to be any happier. So while you think anything, you've got to try anything's better than where you are right now. And people, the reason why I say that is because for me, I was that person. oh, meditation, yeah, that's just what you do, you know, when you're spiritual, or that's just for hippies, or... And I had to stop making excuses, because that's what I was doing. Because it was uncomfortable to make change, and because all I knew was my pain, I sat in my pain. And I moaned about my pain, and I whined about my pain, and that's okay because it was painful. But if I'm not going to make any changes, then I was just creating my own story. And it's been a journey. I've been on this journey for 10 years, and I am in a phenomenal place. And this is why I share this. And now it's not been 10 years of hell. There was a couple of years where they're absolutely hell, and then I had bumps in the road. But with commitment to understanding your journey, or learning to understand yourself, you will see changes. And at one point, and still at points, I think, am I changing? And then when I sit and reflect and I start to connect to the coping mechanisms and tools I have, I realise, oh my God, wow, look at who I am. And that is when we stop abusing ourselves, when we start connecting to look at who we are. Look at the, you know, when we make small changes, you build self-esteem. You build connection to yourself. You build trust in your choices, because the more you try to make a choice that's right for you, in this safe zone of hoping that's going to bring the right thing, the more it's going to feel out of control, because you think, well, I did what I thought was the right thing, but it wasn't the right thing. We have to learn to take chances. We have to learn to make choices that always don't feel the safest and the most comfortable, but that we've got an inkling are going to lead us somewhere. That we've got an inkling and an intuition that this just feels right. We've got to start learning to connect to ourselves, to our higher self, connect to our intuition, connect to what we want in our life. And the more you start to do that, and the more you start to rewire your brain and rewire those snaps, because whatever fires, wires. If you fire small new positive behaviours, just small new positive behaviour, you're wiring. But if you keep firing the same negative behaviours, those same behaviours that are comfortable but bringing you something so crap, you're wiring them. I want you to remember, whatever fire wires. So you just have to make small change to be wiring something better for yourself. Slow down. Connect more. Have more love and compassion for who you are. So I do have a spiritual coaching group on my Facebook. So I am called the Spiritual Hub on Facebook. And I have a coaching group, which is £3.49 a month, where I take people through different stages of healing and awareness with videos and lives and workbooks. And if you want to start a journey of understanding, start a journey of awareness, because you don't know what you know until you know it. And quite often we need to be surrounded by communities or people that have been through the things we've been through, who have an understanding of who we are, or connect with us in a way of healing. And that in turn can start to help us know that we are not alone. The biggest healing factor in depression is connection. Okay, and when we start connecting to people and not feeling so alone, and people who are like-minded and have been through things, that is when we start to heal. And if you don't know whether you need to heal or not, one thing I'll say to you, if your life is unhappy, or you feel lost or depressed or sad or anxious, you need to heal from something. And there is, I would say, at least 70% of the population that need to heal from something, whether it's childhood or not. There is not one person in this world that gets through anything unscathed, that doesn't have some traumas of some kind. And when we all go through something, we don't all have the coping mechanisms to manage. My battery went dead. We don't all have the coping mechanisms to be able to manage it. We don't all have the same resilient levels. We don't all have the same levels of ability due to it not being taught to us to be able to deal with those things. So learning new ways of dealing with things, learning new ways of connecting, learning new ways of understanding yourself is absolutely key and paramount for you to be able to create a life that's right for you. Not a life that's perfect. Not a life that is what you think's right for everyone else. A life that is right for you and that you can be at peace with. Thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe to my channel. You will be getting weekly meditations or weekly, I'm having to move around, weekly meditations, weekly videos, and I will be talking about my journey and how I got to where I am. And there are so many different videos on my YouTube already, hopefully empowering you to understand yourself in a different way. Take care and leave me a comment and tell me how this video has helped you in any way, if it has.